I'm going to love you unconditionally. Or I'm going to love you conditionally.
So the question that's most often asked when people begin to learn the tapping process is, what do I say? And the answer is nearly always to keep it simple and go back to basics if you aren't sure. However, if you really want to start getting meaningful and long-lasting results, then this next session will be fascinating, because here Austin, and I'm going to help as well with a few questions, will explain how language is inseparable from healing. Language is inseparable from healing. And he's also going to talk about how we speak two languages, implicit and explicit language, plus the idea, the concept that no word is ever accidental. Now, when you start to listen to the voice inside your head, and indeed other people's voices at this new subconscious level, you can start to incorporate the healing power of words into your tapping. Austin.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, it's a phrase, I don't know whether you've heard it, but healing is inseparable from language, because we have these languages that we learn. I don't mean foreign languages, that's alien to our original language. What I'm talking about is the language that we learn to speak. Now think about that child is born into the world, and the language that it's going to be exposed to most certainly is the language of love, because what needs to happen is that child needs to be loved. Now this is a concept that I'd really like you to focus on for a few moments. We are born into the language of love, and certainly that's our expectancy, that we are born into the language of love, because we're hardwired again to make those emotional connections for safety reasons. Now, we may grow up in an environment that is not safe. We may grow up in an environment that's dangerous. So we're living in a fearful experience, but we're still exposed to what we expect to be the language of love. And to put that simply, is that we say something like, so think of these two statements that you could say to a newborn. I'm going to love you unconditionally. Or, I'm going to love you conditionally. And the difference is, whoever you are, as you grow and as you develop, we're going to love you come what may. But the other language says, we will only love you if you abide by our rules. And that happens so frequently. So straight away you have a language pattern building up. And that person, that little child growing up, now has learnt the language that they will only be loved when they adhere to the caregiver's wishes, that they behave in a way that's acceptable to the caregivers. I say caregivers because it's not always parents. In my case, it wasn't parents. So now we're looking for that love, we're looking for that acceptance. And if that language we learn, because we've been brought up in a disruptive environment, can be the language of anger, aggression, humiliation, shame. Just pick those just for a moment. Now, I wonder how many people have thought that we can learn to speak any of those languages, and sometimes all of them and more. So you're conditioning a child who's looking for that love, and you're bringing them up in, say, shame or humiliation. You're constantly shaming them, and that's one of the wounds that really impacts on all of us. We are speaking the language of humiliation. We are speaking the language of aggression. Now, it's usually from the caregivers, of course, who are there to love us, and we are wanting that love. But we're also speaking those languages in many different ways. We are speaking those languages, we are learning those languages through explicit language and implicit language. So if you think about it, the explicit is, I'm going to shame you. And that's the end of it, I'm going to shame you. But the implicit language is it's done in a hidden way, but you understand the meaning. And that implicit language is very powerful. So, for example, take a child who's just done an exam at school. And that child goes home and is very proud with the results. And the caregiver says, "Oh, well done." What's the underlying message there? We're not very happy with you. Or, "Oh look, I got 95%. Why didn't you get 100? So those are the languages that we are exposed to, every single one of us. So, for example, I grew up certainly with the language of humiliation, and I certainly grew up with the language of aggression. And make no mistake, I grew up with the intention of never doing that to anybody. However, I have to sit here and say to you, I did get it wrong for a while until I realized I was speaking those same languages. So I would sit in school and feel humiliated. Thought, I'm never doing that to anybody. And yet I did. And it was one day, an engineer said to me, he said, "Why do you treat us this way? You're awful," or whatever. And I thought, I don't care. I said to him, I don't care. You'll do what I ask you to do, and you'll do it the way I want you to do it. But I did care, because I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I thought, you know, he's absolutely right. That is not the way to treat people. I'm bullying them, I'm aggressive to them, and I'm maybe even humiliating them. And that's one of the first points at which I began to make a lot of changes. But those were the languages that I'd learnt very powerfully. And remember, those languages are so embedded that we don't hear our own voices. Now, if I move forward a little bit, and I'd like to move forward to the work we've been doing over this last couple of days, and you'll notice that I listen to every single word. And I know what's powerful and what is needed in terms of to help that person move forward. Because when people use the languages that they've learned, their inner voice, that's what it is. Those caregivers' voice that we hear become our inner voice, and we speak from that inner voice. So when I'm listening to the words that people use, I am building a huge picture of where they've been and what matters to them and how it will have impacted on them. So that's why in this particular field, healing is inseparable from language. But people don't understand that. But I want everyone to understand it, because you are unraveling the person's emotional state. And I'll say visceral state. It's not just a mind thing, it's a total body experience. So listening to words is crucially important. And I'll say, people say, I'll never be able to do it, Austin. You will. Just get into the practice of learning to listen.
Okay, so what you're saying, Austin, is that we have an explicit language, which are the words that I'm speaking now, that are clearly understood, and there's no room for doubt or confusion. And there's also an implicit language that I'm speaking. There's an energy that I'm projecting, and that's an implicit language. And what you're saying here is, it's that implicit language subconsciously that we're all picking up from each other.
Yes. Yes. And this is happening with all of us all the time. And more, as we say, very powerful from the people who are our caregivers.
I know one of my favourite quotes that you often say is, you're not the words that you say, you're the energy that you project. So people can say, I'm not nervous, but inside they're giving off a different vibe.
Yes.
And that's the language that you're reading all the time when you're tapping.
That is exactly the language I'm reading, because what we have to do with the tapping is we have to get into that person's world. Now, of course, we've all had emotional experiences in life. Of course we have, because we're all living creatures who experience these emotions. And if you develop empathy, which is an actual physical process in your body, if we develop empathy, that allows us to cross-reference our own pain with other people's pain, because we've had those language experiences as well.
You talked earlier, didn't you, about humiliation and that being a language that people can often project subconsciously. They don't even know they're feeling it. And that's a big one, isn't it, humiliation?
Humiliation is one of those wounds that go so deep. So there's humiliation, and what happens is that really eats away at our self-esteem and really depletes our belief in ourselves and our confidence in ourselves. And we've learnt that. We haven't learnt it from our own thoughts. We've learnt it externally. It's always learnt externally, because if you think of the opposite to that, say you grow up with somebody who's constantly humiliating you, and you can imagine how that would and does impact on you. But equally, maybe the reverse was true, that you grew up with someone who really nurtured you and built a real confidence within you, then of course that would be your inner language. So humiliation is a real big one. Shame is a big one. We have shame because of the things that we know have been done to us, the things even that people have said to us. People create that shame within us, within our experience. And if you think of humiliation and shame, the body temperature changes when you have those experiences. It increases. So it's a physical experience. It's not just a thought or an emotional process. Everything's an emotional process. But our body temperature changes when we feel that. How many people are aware of that? Think about when you get embarrassed. That's a temperature increase.
Sorry, I just wondered if I can give an example that just popped into mind, actually, Austin. A very good friend of mine felt that she had experienced, she realised, actually not until she was in her 40s, that what holds her back in her life from trying anything new and really going out there and pushing her boundaries is the fear of getting it wrong. It's the fear of any humiliation that may come with getting it wrong. And although she expressed this awareness to me a few times that she knows that's where it's come from, what was really interesting was that I was with her and her family once, and her daughter said something, and in her group situation where she had learnt it with her parents, and I'm sure they had no idea that they were making her feel that way, or that's how she felt. She did something where she slightly ridiculed her daughter, and I saw her daughter's body go like this. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's really held you back, and you had that awareness it's held you back. And yet, when you're with your family, you've almost slipped into that language that you've learned. And when I mentioned it to her later, she was absolutely mortified. She's like, I can't believe I've done that. So that's incredible as well, isn't it? That even, as you said, when your best intention is, I'm never going to do that to anybody. Sometimes when you're in the environment where you've learnt it, you can slip back into that pattern.
Very easily, and I was no exception.
Because picking up on that as well, you often say, don't you, Austin, that it's possible for a child to, we use the example of humiliation again, it's possible for a child to feel humiliated before they even know the word.
Oh, yes, think about that. It's absolutely, Joe, because you've reminded me that I had a conversation with someone some years ago, and I was explaining this experience to them, and I was saying, do you know, I was too young to know the word humiliation, but one thing's for sure, I knew how it felt. You know how that humiliation feels, and can you imagine the impact that's having on you not just emotionally, but physically as well, because humiliation is a physical experience.
Okay, well, let's bring this back to tapping then, because people watching this on the live stream now will want to know how everything you've said about the language, the implicit languages, the explicit languages, how that's going to relate to them doing some tapping at home. Yeah, how do we put this theory into practice with our own tapping? Because it's hard to listen to your own voice, isn't it? Or it can be.
No, it is hard to listen to your own voice, but do you remember what I said yesterday? And it was from my subconscious, but I didn't realise. I did realise when I'd said it, when we were talking about my mother.
You were talking about your mother and how you had taken your mother, and then you picked yourself up because you said, actually, why would I take my mother? Because she should be taking me because I was a little boy. But the fact was that she was drunk.
Absolutely. So I said yesterday that I was taking my mother, and suddenly I thought, how can I make that statement? I was 6 or 5 years old. I have the memory, but I said I was taking my mother. And then it came to my conscious awareness that I'd said it because she was so drunk she couldn't support herself, and I was trying in my little body to support her across the fields as we were walking across the fields, and she fell over. So those are important. Why? We are speaking the language from our subconscious. Remember, we are operating from our subconscious 95 to 97% of the time. So that language comes from our subconscious. And that's why it's crucial to utilize that knowledge, that awareness, to realize that that's where the real us is. It's in our subconscious. And you'll often hear people say it to me when I'm working with them sometimes. They'll make a statement and then they'll say, oh, but I didn't mean that. I'll say, well, actually you did mean it. But sometimes I'm not so forward. I'll say, let's play along with it anyway and see what comes up. Because what happens when people say, oh, I didn't really mean that, that's their conscious brain saying, I shouldn't have said that. That isn't right. But if you go from those first words, or allow those words to build, you are building a picture that becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. Think of the words we use as opening a fantastic window to something you've never understood before. That will allow all of us to enhance again every area of our life. Because we are listening, we are observing, and we're certainly listening. Listen to the sounds, listen to the tonalities. It's crucial because I don't know, but I love music, and you can hear somebody play an instrument. I don't know, it can be a violin, it can be a rock performer, it doesn't matter. And you have goosebumps on you. Something happens, something magical happens. Well, think about doing that with language as you're listening to language. And that wonderful rhythm and harmony of understanding to an incredible depth what people are really saying, what they're expressing, and where they're living through that language that they've learnt. Because language is inseparable from healing.
I will ask the question again because I think it's an important one. How do we now put this information into practice with our tapping? How do we take what we're learning here to make some setup statements that are really going to hit the spot?
Well, again, listen to yourselves. And I know that's hard, but as I said, we can do it because what we're doing is learning to listen to our own words. It's easier to listen to other people's words, of course. But if you learn to listen to your own words and think, where did that word come from? Why did I think that? Why did I feel it? Because if you think of a thought, it's an inner word. Hasn't been expressed, but it's an inner word. So it may not make sense to you, but you think, wow, what can I do with this with tapping? It may sound bizarre. It may make no sense to you at that time. Why did I think that? Why did I feel it? Why did I say that? And I'll give you another example, Joe, which may help. When I was a young man, and I was not long out of that institution, I began to realize quite quickly that I was quite aggressive. And it was often the things that people would say or the way they'd say it that would fire me up within an instant, and I couldn't understand it. And I gave it an awful lot of thought and thought, why am I like that? And it was something in the tonality, it was something in the words, it was something in the way they expressed those words that were obviously triggering something in my subconscious from my background. So growing up in that environment that was pretty fearsome, these people were triggering something inside me. So I began to listen to my own words and started to use my own words to make those changes. And every one of us can do it with the tapping. So think about those words and make a list. So if you're out doing something where you can't be tapping, make a list of the words that you've expressed or you're feeling. That could be significant. And the first hurdle people come across is that they think, oh, that doesn't mean anything to me. Trust me, it will mean something to you. And you'd be amazed at how listening to your language through the words you speak, through how you express, your interaction with others is... I have a wonderful saying that I say to the cats all the time, because I love cats. And I'm always grabbing hold of them and squeezing them, and I'm saying, I'll smash your face in. And I'm squeezing them. So it's not the words there, is it? It's the feeling, it's the intention as I'm squeezing them and I'm cuddling them. So again, it's reading the tonalities. And animals don't really hear the words in that way. They know the feeling, that they connect on your energy. I hope that's helped.
Yeah, I think the short answer. I think the short answer is awareness, isn't it? Make yourself aware, and you can heal so much with awareness. I did want to ask you in a second, Austin, about how important words are, but Dawn, you use this in your practice, don't you? And I know listening to your clients has become probably one of the most important healing tools for you.
Absolutely. What's quite incredible, Joe, is that I'll listen and I'll pick out those key words, and then a little while later, I may not necessarily point them out to them directly, but a little while later, I may refer to the words they've used. And often they'll say, well, how did you know that? How did you know that's what I'm feeling, I'm thinking? And I say, well, you've actually told me. You've said, I didn't say that. It's incredible. So, listening to the words. Sometimes it's, as Austin said, it's listening to the bits between the words. But the words, the way someone may word something to describe what they're feeling or what's going on for them is crucial. And that's usually the key thing that helps us get to the root of the problem, which is obviously what we're aiming at the whole time.
And combined with that, again, I know you're really big on this. Combined with that, listening to the words is feeling the feelings as well, sensing the energy that's being projected to you from the person you're working with.
Yeah, and do you know, Joe, I teach this. I teach kinesiology and various other things. And so often I'll say to the students, just trust, go into that place that you will feel it. I don't have any special skills, any different to any one of you here. If you just trust and stay open to it, you will feel it. And I feel energy. I felt energy changes when Austin was working with.
I saw you do.
Did you? With Anna. You can just feel it. So sometimes even chatting with someone, all of a sudden I can feel, something's coming in. It's key. It's relevant. And everyone can do that, because I've worked with many students over the years, and even if they haven't tuned into at the beginning, they have all been able to go on and do that.
So how aware are you then of your own energy? Are you, because this is an important point, because people might think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get really self-conscious now, constantly thinking, what energy am I projecting? Do you find it easy to be aware of your own energy? Are you aware of the vibe that people pick up from you, for instance?
Well, often it's easy to find it in somebody else. We're operating from our subconscious 95% of the time, and I'm no different. So I'm not always aware. And if somebody says something, I think, oh my goodness, have they picked up on that? Like anything though, Joe, when we make some time, when we calm the nervous system, we can tune in, and then I am very much in connection with my energy. I know how I'm feeling and possibly what I'm giving out. But when we get caught up in that madness of busy, then of course you're not assessing anything. Yeah. But even when you're standing in a queue in a supermarket, have you ever had that situation where there's just something about the person behind you just want to move away a little bit and you don't know why?
Yes.
Or you're turn around and you'll smile at someone and you just, oh, they're really nice. And you don't know why, they haven't said anything. So we're all assessing energy all the time.
Yes, massively. And you talked about animals too, do it. That's how they communicate.
That's how they communicate,
with us.
animals, yes.
Okay, so we talked about explicit and implicit language, how we are all speaking these languages all the time, start becoming aware of them, start utilising them in the tapping process. Energy, I think, is key in becoming aware of this vibe that you're giving off to people. But just to go back to the words again, Austin.
They can. It's if I just give an example, because you mentioned people in the profession, and there's something that we will always teach the students is you can work with someone for an hour and a half, and you may occasionally have the feeling, I didn't feel that we achieved very much there. And we call it the by the way, or the hand on the door. By the way, did I tell you? And it's just as they're leaving. And you think, that's it. That is everything I've been wanting for an hour and a half. But of course, they're now relaxing, they're leaving. Their guard is down, they're consciously relaxing. But of course, they're telling you everything in that by the way. So that's important. But again, it's as Joe is saying, it's allowing your language to be understood by the other person as well. But can I just add here, Joe, because you've just reminded me of something. The thing that I experience, and I'm sure 100% Dawn experiences, is that because we work with people who've learnt corrupted languages, I'll put it that way, they misinterpret our language. This is a biggie. Would you?
Oh my
Dawn?
goodness, yes, absolutely. Yeah, there was a situation. Do you remember with a lady that you worked with?
Yes.
Where
Yes.
a client of mine, and she came back and she said, "Oh, I struggled with." Is that okay to relay this one?
Yeah, but not the name of the person.
No, not the name, no. She said, I struggled with the session a little bit with Austin. She said one of the things was that at the end of the session, he asked me how I felt it went. So he clearly is lacking confidence. And I thought, oh my goodness, if someone asked me how they felt, I would interpret that they really care, that I feel that I've achieved what I came here to achieve. And then there was a series of other different comments along those lines, and it became really clear that she was misinterpreting everything. And the interesting thing was, she was coming to me initially at the time with stress-related problems, and most of her stresses were around communication.
Yes.
And everybody was getting it wrong around her. I thought, I now understand that you're misinterpreting your process of how you're interpreting things is so distorted that you're hitting communication problems with everybody, and yet you still feel it's everybody else. So that was a really incredible lesson.
Yeah, so she was speaking her language, but she couldn't understand other people's language.
We've got a guided meditation coming up in a second, but I think one last point, but literally you've got no time, but I do want to make it, is how powerful it is to listen and how powerful it is to be silent, because that is a language in itself, isn't it, that is very rarely misinterpreted. So if you ever get stuck, listen and become silent.
Yes.
Fantastic. Good short answer. Okay. Now we're going to move on to our final session.